All right, well, we still have a few more people coming in now, but we might just get started. So welcome everybody to the Climate Wise Communities Bushfire Ready webinar for Roseville and East Lindfield. My name's Lauren. I'm from the Environment Sustainability team at Ku-ring-gai Council. On behalf of Ku-ring-gai Council, I'd like to pay respects to our past Aboriginal custodians of the land. We acknowledge that the First Nations people care and connection with the country, and we hope to learn from their knowledge. Before we start, I'd like to just begin with some basic housekeeping. So this session will be recorded. So if you'd like to watch it back in the future, or if you happen to be chatting to your neighbours about your bushfire plan and they weren't able to make it tonight, they can pop online and have a look at it as well. If you have any technical issues, please head to the chat box at the top of the page. But if you have any questions direct to our panellists, please use the Q&A box for any questions. You can ask those at any time during the evening, and we will get to them as we go along. So I'd like to introduce our panellists for us here tonight. We have Dr. Jenny Scott, who's the Sustainability Program Leader at Ku-ring-gai Council, and Mark Schuster, our Strategic Bushfire Officer. We've also got with us today Captain Andrew Wilson from the RFS Kalara Brigade and James Manuel from New South Wales Fire and Rescue. So the Climate Wise Communities program and workshop was developed in the wake of the 2009 Black Saturday fires, and it incorporates the findings from the Royal Commission. And one of the key findings was that very few people had bushfire plans, and for those that did, not all of them worked. So for the aim of this workshop is to show you a worst case bushfire scenario in Ku-ring-gai area so that you can make plans accordingly. So first up, we just have a poll. I'm going to pop that up now. And if you could please complete this poll, there's only 10 questions and it's just about your knowledge of bushfire prone land and whether or not you've experienced bushfire and your bushfire survival plan if you have one. So go ahead and fill that in over the next minute or so. So I'll keep that poll going for another minute, just so you can get through all of those questions. But in the meantime, I'll get going with what we're going to be looking at tonight. So we're going to be showing you the SIM table, which we acquired back in 2019. The technology comes from the United States and it simulates fire behaviour of some past fires. Tonight, we're going to look at some from California and from New South Wales. And we can also look at what we would predict a fire to do in our area. So you can really understand what you need to do to be prepared. So I'll hand over to Jenny to talk about the campfire.
Hi everyone, hope you're having a good evening. It's a nice, wet, misty, rainy evening here. So, you wonder why you're talking about bushfires on a day like today, but that will change. That's absolutely guaranteed. So, when we set out to do this, we had a program, or I still do have a program, called Climate Wise Communities. And we used to use paper maps with little Lego figures on them. And we showed people where bushfires might come from and how they might go through, and people could see where they evacuate to or what evacuation routes they could possibly get out of, different situations, and move their little Lego pieces around on the map. Nowadays, with the SIM table, we can show them a much more dynamic presentation of those fires, and they can also mark where their properties are and still consider those evacuation issues, where they might go, who they might see. Now, whilst we present you with a fairly scary scenario in this campfire that was in the US, we also will, as we go through, refer to the Climate Wise Communities website, because it's got the ways that you plan for these kinds of really disastrous events. And it's not just bushfire, but storm and heat and flood as well. So what we'll do is we'll work our way, when we get to that stage, through a fire in Ku-ring-gai in your area, and every now and then we'll stop and we'll find out what the emergency services are doing at that stage in the fire, and then we look at Climate Wise Communities and work out what you could be doing, either in preparation or at that stage of the fire. So this particular fire that we're showing you up front is just to give you an idea of how disastrous a fire can be when a perfect storm of mistakes occurs. So in this particular instance, the weather conditions leading up to the fire event were, and it was in, by the way, November 2018, there was a heavy grass cover because they'd had a wet spring. It was an unusually dry autumn, and there were very low humidity levels and unusually dry fuels. In addition to that, hot, dry, gusty winds, and it was a red flag warning day, which is very similar to our catastrophic warning day. So what we're going to do, we're going to play the fire. You can see it in the top right-hand corner. The fire has ignited about 6:15. We'll just stop it there, Lauren, for a sec. The fire ignited about 6:15 in the morning, and within a very short space of time, which is now 18:07, is it? 7:50. So within the hour, it has travelled about 5 kilometres. Across the whole of that map is about 40 kilometres. And you can see some spot fires have started up around that lake, just a little bit to the south and the east. So we'll let the fire continue again. Now this is taken from a satellite. Now, as I said, the fuel loads were around a record level at this time of year. And the fire tankers were dispatched to try and deal with that fire, but the windy mountain roads meant they couldn't get access to the seat of the fire. And of course, the aircraft couldn't fly because the wind speeds were too high. So at the moment, the wind speeds were gusting above 85 kilometres an hour. And you can see how the embers have travelled even further, closer to the township of Paradise, which you'll see there in the middle. So as the morning proceeded, the township of Ku-ring-gai, which is down here, didn't receive any warning before the fire hit their town, and a caller at 7:07 a.m. reported the fire was ripping. At 7:23, the sheriff's office in Pulga, way back there, began evacuations. By 8 a.m, the fire had entered the eastern township of Paradise. That's those spot fires there in the centre. And several minutes later, the Butte County Sheriff's Department issued evacuation orders for the entire town. Wind speeds were now well and truly going up to 100 kilometres an hour, and the fire was growing rapidly. And not only is it growing rapidly, it's cutting off the exits to the south at this point. The urban firestorm spread from building to building. Most of the residents in Ku-ring-gai and many from Paradise were unable to evacuate prior to the fire due to the speed. The firefighters, for the most part, never attempted to control the fire, but rather concentrated on just saving lives. And according to the California fire chief, pretty much the community of Paradise was destroyed. It's that kind of devastation. The wind that was predicted came, and it's just wiping us out. Now you can see right over again to a little more to the left, to the east, is another spot fire that started, and it's closing off the only other exit route. So now the only route left is where the fire is approaching rapidly, and it soon will be cut off. It's being cut off now. So there were thousands of people trapped in this town. And as the report says, the fire was blowing across buildings and igniting them as it went. The first hours of the fire saw a cascade of failures in the emergency management system because it was a patchwork system and had never been tested. The opt-in nature of the system was one problem, but the other problem was 17 cell phone towers came down in the winds. So there was no cell phone signal. And there were many points of failure in this fast-moving fire where any room for error was just a disaster. Thousands of 911 calls inundated the 2 emergency dispatchers on duty. Emergency alerts suffered from human error as officials failed to include 4 areas in the city in evacuation orders. Technical errors on the day meant that the emergency alerts failed to reach 94% of the residents. In the first 4 hours of the campfire, it caused 86 civilian fatalities, 12 civilian and 5 firefighters injured. 18,804 structures were destroyed in 4 hours and 62,000 hectares burnt, with a total damage bill of 16.5 billion, of which 4 billion was in the form of uninsured losses. Now, still to date, this is the worst fire in Californian history. And you can see, as I said at the start, it's a perfect storm. What could go wrong did go wrong. And the fire was just a really intense, really fast-moving fire that fighting facilities couldn't possibly try to contain. The only way to have got to it in the very early phases, they might have been able to put it out, but of course they couldn't get to it. And that's not such an unusual circumstance. Andrew, do you want to say anything at this point about this type of fire? Oh, can't hear you, Andrew. Not sure why. So you talking, Andrew? We just can't hear you is all.
You'll have to type quickly, Andrew.
Not our end? We're just checking it's not our end. Okay, while we're sorting that out, I'll just go back and tell you a bit more about the results of those kind of fires. Is that we've learned the lesson that this is a type of fire you need to prepare for. It's inevitably going to happen in Australia, and as you'll see in a moment, the Gosper Mountain Fire was an example of that. I think we've got Andrew up on these volume. If you unmute yourself, Andrew, we'll probably get your dulcet tones. Yeah, there we go. You're talking. Oh, why is that? Yeah,
I will say with climate change, we're going to get more and more of these larger type weather-driven fires rather than fuel-driven fires, and that's becoming a characteristic of Australia, Spain and the United States now. There'll be more weather-driven fires, which are stronger intensity. They go through the canopy of trees, and no amount of almost hazard reduction before such a fire will have, a beneficial effect for those in its path. And with Ku-ring-gai, we've got about 100 kilometres of bushland residential interface. It's huge for such a small LGA, but we're the second, almost third fire-prone LGA in New South Wales. So we've really got to be ready for fire and prepare as best we can. So I'll go back to Jenny, and maybe sound is fixed by now.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Well, it's still our technical whiz is trying to work out why we can't hear Andrew, but we will continue on and come to Andrew as soon as he's got a voice. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at something that occurred in Australia that was close to that type of fire, but it was in an area that was not populated with as many people. So hence there wasn't the scale of loss that there was with the American fire. And this is the one that happened in 2019, the Gosford Mountain Fire. Now, the Gosford Mountain Fire was coming on the back of very similar conditions to the conditions they had in the Paradise Fire. So it had been one of Australia's longest droughts. The vegetation was extremely dry, including the fuel. So the fire started in October 2019, and it became eventually one of the biggest fires, or the biggest fire in New South Wales history. 90 homes were lost and countless animals and insects killed by the fire as it burnt through 512,000 hectares before it was put out by the extreme rainfall more than 3 months later. So it was a very long fire, and it was also one that covered an enormous area of our state. The conditions leading up to the fire were central to the fire's size and strength. It was the hottest and driest year on record for New South Wales. There's no evidence the fire was driven by high fuel loads, that's important to note, or poor forest management. It is more likely it was average fuels and the record-breaking dryness that led to the intensity of the fire, as Mark was saying earlier. On the 26th of October, there was a lightning storm and approximately 19,000 lightning strikes, one of which hit a point called Gosford Mountain. It started at 10:55 in the morning, and within 2.5 hours, it had grown to 65 hectares. So that gives you an indication of how dry the conditions were. Wind speeds were around 60 to 70 kilometres an hour, so strong winds. And this allowed the fire to move quickly, and over the next day, the blaze had expanded to 512 hectares. The high winds also meant helicopters couldn't fly, similar to the Paradise Fire, and deploying firefighting teams and firefighting resources was difficult as they were already busy with fires all over New South Wales. If you remember, there were fires up and down the entire coast. So we'll just stop there because I think we're going to try and get Andrew's words on. Andrew, can we hear you now?
Can you?
Yes, we can.
Good.
So is there anything you want to say at this point?
Oh, well, I remember this fire. A number of our members were involved in this Gosford Mountain fire. We did a significant amount of backburning for a period of several weeks, usually in the evenings. And that was all about trying to stop this fire spreading across the Hawkesbury River and into the northern parts of Sydney.
Right, okay. So after 2 weeks, rain slowed the fire down and it was close to being out, but a change in weather causes the fire to rise up again and head southeast, travelling up to 12 kilometres per day. Now that's a pretty, on average, fast travelling fire. The 12th of November had been declared as a catastrophic fire day, if you can remember, 2019. Another fire to the southwest is travelling very fast and creating its own weather. A pyrocumulus nimbus, which is those big tall columns of cloud, had formed, and RFS volunteers witnessed lightning strikes, starting even more spot fires in that time. With strong winds and high temperatures, the fire progresses on to the north and south boundaries. By the end of the day, it had a perimeter of 170 kilometres, and there are now 300 fires burning across the state. So not only is this one taking a run, but also we've got 300 other fires. So our resources were beyond stretched. As the fire progresses, embers are travelling ahead of the fire and starting spot fires. Embers can travel up to 10 kilometres ahead of the fire, depending on the wind speed, and embers are responsible for about 80% of house losses, which is another very important point. The same storm activity leads to a microburst in the Gordon area at the same time, which snapped healthy trees and flattened cars. So there was a whole different problem going on down in this neck of the woods. But up there, more spot fires started toward the south and the east, which we'll see happening very shortly. You'll see the spot fires starting to go all over the place. So what date are we up to? The 11th. There are the spot fires starting to the southeast. So at around the 5th of December, the fires in the northeast, and you'll see not only we got these spot fires in the southeast, but very soon there's going to be spot fires appear up to the north. And they became a whole nother set of fires for the fire authorities to have to try and deal with if they hadn't already had enough on their plate. Now you can see how quickly we are obviously playing this speeded up, but you can see how they quickly became established all across that north face of the fire. And now these fires are generally moving towards each other, and they're going to join up and form a mega fire. So on around the 5th of December, the other fires to the northeast joined up with the Gosford Mountain fire and formed a mega blaze. Later on, it also joined the Paddock Run and Thompson Creek fires. A back burn was planned for the 14th of December, but the weather conditions on the day were a little bit mild with little or no wind. However, by 2 p.m, the winds had picked up again and in a southwesterly direction. And at 2:54, the first spot overs from that fire started, which you'll see a little bit to the south. It's taking a run down there towards Lithgow. Within 30 minutes, crews were doing property protection from that back burn. At this point, it's the largest fire in Australian history and 5 times bigger than Singapore. So, Andrew, what was it like up there at this stage?
Well, it was a large fire. We were struggling to contain it. As I say, we were doing a significant amount of back burning with that containment strategy being the objective, and it was using the more reasonable conditions in the evening to do all that back burning rather than during the day. As all the members of the Rural Fire Service are volunteers, it was a matter of people making themselves available when they could and spending long hours in the evening conducting this back burning activity, not just RFS brigades in the northern part of Sydney, but from quite a wide region were involved. It was an enormous operation and continued for many, many weeks. And in fact, I think, as you'll say at some point, the only effective solution to putting out this fire was vast amounts of rainfall, which subsequently did occur many months later.
And James, what about fire and rescue? What was their role in this?
Sorry, can you hear me this time?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So again, we had numerous what we call strike teams, so groups of fire appliances stationed around. So we were supporting the RFS in a lot of these things. We predominantly work on the urban interface and protect properties in there. A lot of this is more remote area work that the RFS has, but we certainly had quite a number of well, we had several hundred firefighters in place during this campaign here. I was a bit further south down towards Exeter, but I live on Central Coast, so I'm on the map there as well. So yeah, it was certainly concerning.
Right, thank you. So the fire crews were working very hard to stop the fire jumping the Hawkesbury River. So if we just zoom in a little bit on that southern end of the fire, you'll see just how close it came to getting across the Hawkesbury River. I'll scroll down a little bit. So you can see the Hawkesbury there, snaking its way around, and you can see how close the fire is. Plans were made for the evacuation of Hornsby and the Hills district at this stage, because if it did cross the river and took off, there's, again, no stopping it. Experts estimated the fire could have covered the distance from Wiseman's Ferry to the urban fringe of Hornsby and Ku-ring-gai in one day. This is very possible considering the speeds and distances of the earlier runs. Fortunately, a southwesterly wind blew the flames back, helping fire crews contain the fire. This highlights the fact that fire can move very quickly, potentially, and lead to mass evacuations, which are unlikely to go smoothly. Embers travel up, in some cases, in these conditions, even to 20 kilometres ahead of the fire front, and start new fires, which just complicates matters more. Even though the fire isn't contained at the Hawkesbury, it begins to threaten Lithgow and more homes are lost. So the fire went on for 3 months in total, and the rain put the fire out. And the rain system that put the fire out was one that was extraordinarily intense. And if you remember, the Warragamba Dam at the start of this fire around about 40% full. In the first 3 days of that intense rainfall event that put this fire out, Warragamba Dam went up to 90% full. So in that very short space of time, a huge amount of rain fell. Now, if it hadn't been for the timing of that rain and the intensity of that rain, this could well have impacted Ku-ring-gai. So this is the kind of scenario that we want to help you prepare for. Because at the end of the day, and I think all our fire experts here will agree, it's not a matter of if, but when. And we need to be prepared for that. And whilst our fire people, including council, all have their preparation in place, their systems in place, what we're going to get you to do is have your own system in place. So, Mark, do you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, a lot of people, actually, we're surrounded, Ku-ring-gai is surrounded by bushland on 3 sides. On the west, of course, with Lane Cove. The north, the huge expanse up to the Hawkesbury of Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. But people don't realise Middle Harbour, Garrigal National Park has a very large fire history over a very large time. An old fellow up in Belrose showed me some photos a few weeks back of looking across from Belrose towards Lindfield, towards the railway station. This was in the 1920s, and you could see everything. A huge fire had gone right up Middle Harbour, and it was as bald as a badger, so to speak. You just see all the tree trunks standing with no fuel left. At the moment, we've got very high fuels down in Moores Creek catchment, and we just had the Kingsway burn recently, about a month back, and we're planning for the Chase HR burn a bit further to the north, then Moores Creek burn, which is in the top of the Moores Creek catchment. These, will reduce fuel levels, of course, and that probably worked for about 4 to 5 years. Then the fuel builds up. We can't put in another fire due to botanical and biodiversity reasons, probably for another 12 to 13 years. So you've got that gap where fuels do build up. But really the biggest concern is still, in my mind, embers, because embers travel so quickly. They can lodge in your doormat, underneath your roof tiles if you've got a tiled roof, underneath your subsurface floors. So Jenny's going to take us through the whole sort of gamut of preparing the bushfire plan with your house, your yard, and your community. So, yep. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, now we're going to have a look at your local area from the satellite view. So you can see there we've got your area that we targeted in this image. So what we're going to do is, this map is where the sim table comes in. Now the sim table has got, oops, Lauren, a bit premature with the fire. The sim table is going to show us, number one, fire speed and how it reacts to all the different conditions that could happen on the day. So the software that sits behind this program has built into it the vegetation types that we have in Ku-ring-gai. It has obviously all the scale of the land form, so all the contours in it. It has the humidity set at very low, like it would be on a catastrophic fire day. It has a temperature at about 35 degrees. And we're able, you see that wheel up in the top left-hand corner, that allows us to vary the wind speed and direction. So we'll start this fire, as Lauren has just done, and you'll see it taking a hold there. You can also look at the time at the bottom of the screen and see how quickly that fire is moving. Now, by the way, we speed this fire up so that we don't actually have to sit here for possibly 3 days and watch the fire progress. So sometimes the fire will appear to go ridiculously fast, and that's because it's hit a slope and it's travelling uphill quite quickly, and then it goes slower downhill. So this is our scenario. At this point in time, we've got no wind to speak of. So we'll just stop there for a second and ask each of our fire people, what's happening at this stage, Andrew, with RFS?
Well, in advance of a catastrophic fire day, with that typical weather of high temperature, low humidity, and maybe we haven't quite got in the scenario yet, but a strong wind from the northwest, the RFS is going to have as many members as it can on standby, some even at station, to be ready in case there is such a breakout as this. We're not normally in our stations, but on catastrophic days, we do have that advanced planning to move trucks and members around and try and improve the overall response capability. And certainly, as soon as a fire does break out like this, there's quite an enormous response to it. Given the background of those weather conditions, there is the likelihood that it could become a very large fire quite quickly and spread across a wide area.
Thanks, Andrew. And James, what would fire and rescue be doing at this stage?
On a catastrophic day, we generally will push urban, like city fire trucks that aren't in the urban interface, out to stations. So we do have pre-positioned plans. So we would move applying fire trucks closer to fire station. Now there is a fire station at Forestville here. I think to the west would be Willoughby and north would be Gordon. So they're the three closest fire and rescue units to this area. But yeah, by this stage, at this sort of fire, we will be getting calls and we'll be sending a minimum of 2 pumps, a minimum of 2 fire trucks out for the initial calls. But a lot of this response is coordinated at the RFS headquarters. And so when we got to think a lot more strategically when we're dealing with these fires. We're trying to think smarter and harder, and we start feeding resources into these local commands to try and combat this stuff. We'll be looking at public information going out, using the ABC radio channel to try and keep everyone aware. The different stages of the fire will be watch and act, or emergency warnings and this sort of stuff. So we'll be watching that closely, getting the public information about what we're asking people to do, and then preparing action now. So we would really hope by this stage we'd have that fire plan, which I know you'll get onto shortly, and people will be asking to enact that or start getting out.
Great, thank you, James. Mark, what would council do?
Thanks, Jenny. We're part of we have a local emergency management group, and we'd be talking also with Northern Beaches local emergency management group, because that's just on their side of the river. And we also work with the police, of course, RFS, Fire and Rescue. So they'd be working out particularly about evacuation pinch points. Where are the weak points when you have to evacuate? Do you need a policeman into the intersection, say, on that eastern side, from some of the major roads up to the Ku-ring-gai road, so people can get out quickly and safely and easily? So yeah, an emergency management group from the councils would be activated and coordinating with all other agencies. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to look at what you could do if this situation occurs. So we're going to go over to Climate Wise. We'll leave the fire for a moment, and the Climate Wise Communities website. And what this website is basically a very comprehensive planning tool for your household, and you get to look at a whole range of different elements that all contribute to the outcome that you experience in a catastrophic fire. So you can see this is the home page of Climate Wise Communities, and we just press on the button Start Your Ready Check, and we scroll down a little bit, and your usual disclaimer, accept, and we come to step 1. Now, the first thing is you've got to understand your risk. So you put in your address. In this case, we've just pre-selected an address. And what it will come up with is an outline of your property. Now, those little hatched areas means that that's a part of our planning. There's no intensification is meant to take place, further intensification. The red is, hang on, haven't finished, back up. The red is the bushfire prone lands going out to the yellow where it's an ember zone. So we'll just go down to a summary of the risks that you want to be planning for if this was your address. So you'd want to be planning for bushfire for sure, ember attack definitely. There's exit issues in that particular neck of the woods. Flood, there's also a flood risk in that area. And by flood risk, we mean a very short-term, intense overland flow, because it's such steep country, you get high velocity water flow down those areas. Storm and heat. Now, everybody will get a tick for storm and heat because that's a universal risk across Ku-ring-gai. But the others are very much dependent on your location. So you can save that information to a PDF, so when it comes to your plan, you know what risks you need to plan for. So we move on to step 2, and step 2 is going to be all about your personal situation. And it's understanding the kinds of things that might affect when and how you evacuate, and whether you can evacuate in some cases. So it will ask you a whole series of questions. So if we tick on, say, you live alone, and it will give you a little bit of advice about the sorts of things you might consider when you make your plan. So if you can help others or whether you're going to need help and how that can be pre-arranged. So as we scroll down, we'll click on another one. Are you a carer? We'll say yes. And people you are caring for may be dependent on you in an emergency, more than likely. So you have to ensure you've got the time and resources and the ability to cater for their needs as well as your own. And you can't forget how you have to communicate your plan and have them join in with making the plan would be ideal. So it goes through health and medical conditions. Pets in the household is a big one because there's been more than a few people who have died trying to get back and save their pets. Whether or not you have your own transport needs to be pre-arranged. Don't leave it to the day. If you're proficient in English in the household, or whether you need to get some assistance to read these things, or in fact translate them for perhaps your neighbours who are maybe not so proficient in English. Being a homeowner or a renter makes a difference because as a homeowner, you can do things to make your property more resilient, where the renter is more in a position where they have to work with the landowner, property owner, to try and get things improved. The phone connections, as we said with the American version, the phone lines all went down. The power went down, meaning you have no landline. The mobile phones went down because the towers blew down. So the sort of thing that you might need to cater for is that you have no mobile or landline communication. And what are you going to do? How are you going to keep in touch with the outside world and learn what is happening out there? So again, you save this to a PDF. Council doesn't want your personal information. So when you save it to your computer, it's yours and yours alone. It gets lost after you click out. So we'll stop there for a second. We'll go back to the fire. And I'm really testing Lauren out tonight because this is the first time she's had to fly this system. James normally does it, but James is in Brisbane.
You're doing wonderfully, Lauren.
She is. Okay, so we're going to let this fire progress and we're going to start picking up the wind speed. Now we're going to have it come out of the northwest, so it's blowing towards the southeast. So we'll take it up to, that's good. We've put it up now. We'll just go to 70, 80 is all right. So we pick the wind speed up to a speed where the aircraft would have difficulty flying in these conditions. So we'll just speed it up a tad, just a little. We'll just let it go a little bit faster so we can see what happens. Now you can see some spot fires starting ahead of the main fire front. And that main fire front you can see is moving to the south. When it hits the urban area, depending on the activity that's going on by way of defence on the urban area, it may or may not penetrate into that urban area. But the risk is you could get house-to-house transmission. So if one house catches fire, then the neighbouring houses around it can catch fire. And so that's how the fire spreads through urban areas, as it happened in Canberra in 2003. That was an absolute classic, that one. So we can see the spot fire starting. So the wind speed's going fairly fast. At the moment, it's on a steep slope and it's paused, or is it still going? No, it's still going. So, Andrew, what's the RFS thinking at this stage?
Well, with the fire having started, there'd be quite an enormous response to it, to that general area. But our objective is not to actually tackle the fire. We wouldn't, certainly given the weather conditions and the risk that all presents. We're certainly not going to be going into the bush trying to chase that fire and extinguish it directly. our focus becomes more on protecting members of the public. So particularly around in those immediate streets near the fire, we're going to be looking at what we can do there in terms of property protection and public in those areas. And then if we think about the risk in the next 30 minutes to 60 minutes, it's about getting the warning messages out either through text messages or through the Hazards Near Me app to indicate to people that there is a fire in the vicinity and it's time to start invoking their bushfire plans.
So can you tell us why at different times the first fire warning you might get will be it's too late to leave, shelter in place?
Yes, well, the message would be watch and act, and then it may well have got to a point where that it's too late to leave, and that therefore it is a matter of shelter in place and find a sturdy structure and keep out of the radiant heat and wait for the fire to pass over. That's not going to take particularly long, but there's far more danger in making a last-minute escape than it is to actually stay in a sturdy structure away from the radiant heat, which is the big problem to watch out for. It's a matter of protecting yourself whilst you can as that fire passes over. If it is too late to leave, that's the best option rather than making a last-minute attempt to get out along a road which may be blocked or create some other sort of issue. You're much better off in a sturdy structure than in a vehicle. But we're still going to issue that warning for others who are further afield that they still have time to potentially invoke their bushfire plan. But again, it depends what their plan is, and it may be the best option for them as well, even in some of those surrounding suburbs, to wait in place rather than seek to go somewhere else in a hurry at the last minute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Andrew. And James, fire and rescue be doing something similar, I imagine?
Oh, very much so. At this point, we would definitely be property protection only, so that we have got no capacity to go into that bush and try and put it out. And the speed of this is travel. We're trying to keep ahead of it and protect the properties and stuff. And we're really, just trying to protect lives at this point. Going back, you mentioned, why sometimes is our first warning going to be that it's too late to get out. And if you look at when this fire is going, it is a rapidly evolving situation. We've already got heat before the fire comes. And as soon as this fire takes off, that smoke comes across, billowing down. It's going to be hard to drive, and it causes a lot of time and effects. A lot of the houses are built such that it can withstand even direct fire front for a period of time. So people are often safer inside. And if you look at the smoke and that sort of stuff, the keeping inside out of the smoke is definitely the safer things, rather than being caught out in the car, having accidents because you can't see, things like that, and panic sets in. So definitely, often it is that time to stay in shelter, to protect in place.
Great. Thank you, James. Mark, have you seen fires like this? I know you're mostly had rural experience, but in this urban setting?
Yeah, I haven't personally seen it, but it's affected me, of course, because, my family lived at the interface, my brother-in-law at Kinglake, and three of them, the whole family perished, and that affected me in many ways and actually brought me to Ku-ring-gai in many ways to sort of honour, what they couldn't do anymore. And they were used to normal fires. They had 30 years of normal fires at Kinglake. They were up against the bush, the mountain ash, so to speak. But once these bigger fires came, they just couldn't cope. They sheltered in the middle of the house in the bathroom, but the coronial came up and found the temperature in the middle of the house got up to 1400 degrees centigrade. So no one could really withstand that sort of force of these fireballs, so to speak. So yeah, and you can see around Ormond, the Chase and Moores Creek catchment, that fire swept through there pretty well up the slopes. So really, my main thing would be to leave very early to get out from that location. Very vulnerable. Thanks, Jen. And no one fire is the same. Every fire does different things. I do know that at the interface, particularly for wind directions. Thanks.
Yeah, that's certainly something I should have mentioned at the beginning. We're not saying this is how it will occur. we're saying this is one of 1,000 different ways it could occur. It's just an example of an extreme event. So don't rely on this being what you prepare for, because it could be entirely different. So we'll just stop there and we'll go back to our Climate Wise. And what the aim of Climate Wise is that you're prepared on multiple fronts. So you've understood your personal situation, including your risks, and you've also looked at the members of your household and what you're set up and the kind of things that you'll have to include in an emergency evacuation plan. And of course, as has been already said, the best plan is always leave early. In fact, if it's a catastrophic fire day forecast for the following day, it's a good idea to go out even if there is no actual fire threatening. Just be on the safe side. So in this one, this is all about your property. Now, it'd be great if you can leave your property and be, fairly confident that it'll still be standing when you come back. So it's about making your property more resilient. So that's just a little mud map that someone's drawn of their property and looked at some of the features that might be significant in a fire, whether that be a positive feature or a negative feature. And we scroll down and we've got these tables for all the different types of extreme weather, but we're looking at bushfire tonight. Now you can see where it's got a red square. That means it's a significant weakness of the property. Where it's a moderate weakness, it's orange. Where it's blue or green, it's fairly resilient. And we've divided up the house into the roof to start with. And you can see it looks at the design of the roof and the materials and the age and the condition of the roof. Whether or not you have roof sprinklers, and sprinklers, depending on where they're situated, may be very useful or limited useful. So as I understand it, around the gutters is the most useful, creating a little bit like a shower of fine mist around the house so that the embers can't get into the house. As we said, embers cause the majority of house loss. And the roof, skylights and ventilators are all places where embers can get into the house. So they need to be secure, either with a mesh that won't allow the embers in, or wound down tight so that embers can't get in. We look at eaves and fascias, the vents, weep holes in the chimneys. The embers go up chimneys, they also come down chimneys. So the thing to remember is, as a fire front approaches, because it's so intensely hot as it comes, the temperature in your house is staying relatively cooler to the outside compared to the external temperature. And what happens is you get a vacuum created inside your house because of the temperature difference. So the closer the fire front comes, the more sucking action it's bringing the hot air into your house to equalise the temperature. Now, what does it bring in with it? Embers. So that's why trying to secure your house as much as possible, it's not only good for wintertime and not letting hot air out, it's also very useful in summertime for keeping cool air in and not letting embers in. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And this is just a little bit about how you evaluate what you need to address in your property to make it more secure. So we look at the walls, again, the materials and conditions. The windows and frames are important. Windows can explode with the radiant heat, and the old timber frames can ignite. And there's often air gaps around windows. They're not sealed against the, for example, rim of the window. So garage doors are another one you've got to really consider, because there's usually a little bit of a gap at the bottom of those. The floor and the subfloor space are important, because if you store materials under the floor that could ignite. You're just setting up a big bonfire. So you look at that section and work out what you should and shouldn't have. Verandas and decking, old wooden verandas, very prone to igniting. Modern timbers are more fire resilient, and there are some that are fire rated. And so if you're thinking of replacing your decking, a fire rated timber would be good. Then we look at the exterior of the house, whether there's any vertical barriers that might help shield the house, like an embankment or a continuous screen of low volatility vegetation. The landscaping, and there's a lot there that you can do to reduce the risk of not only fire being transferred into your house, but also stopping the embers from getting close to your house. Trees have an advantage of both being a net to catch embers, and if they're properly maintained, they won't ignite. So the water supply, what do you have? No tank? Do you have an empty tank? Do you have a dedicated firefighting tank? And then the pump, you've got a pool, that's great. But you've got a pool with no pump, that's not very much use. And a pool with a diesel pump is ideal. Diesel rather than petrol or electric, unless you've got a solar system and can run that pump off an independent power supply. The fencing and the gate, some people have wicker fencing, which creates a nice volatile line to take the fire straight up to your house. If you have gas bottles, barbecue, either that or actual gas for the house, make sure that the venting valve is turned away from the house. So they're designed, those gas bottles, to heat up, and rather than explode, as the gas gets hotter and hotter, it will vent the gas in a long flame, 2, 3, 4 meters long, that will shoot out from that venting valve. So that's why you don't want it facing the house, because it will burn your house. It just has to go out into the open air. Then we have a few other bits and pieces at the end there that help you consider the vulnerability. If we could scroll down a little further. Doormats are an important one. You don't want doormats that are going to catch fire when an ember lands on it. And pets and their enclosures. How do you make that pet enclosure fire resilient? If you are thinking you might not get home in time to get your pet out, what can be done to help it survive the conditions? Now, understanding your bushfire attack level or BAL rating is something that's important as well. And I'll get Mark to talk about the BAL rating.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. BAL's a very good thing to know about. The number there is actually the kilowatts per square metre. They call it fire line intensity. So BAL 40 would be 40,000 watts per square metre, which is pretty high. Human body could tolerate 2,000 or 3,000 for about 5 to 10 seconds. So if you've got protective gear even. So they're pretty high fire levels. It goes from a BAL low, pretty low sort of fire intensity, right through the flame zone, which is above BAL 40. Now, if you're doing a DA, if you're renovating your house in any major way, you would have, and you're in a bushfire prone zone or bushfire prone lands, you would have to get a bushfire assessment done to determine your BAL, to work out what radiant heat level is up against your wall. So you'd have to build to an appropriate BAL level. It's mainly for radiant heat, but the further you go up and even retrofit your house or have a new house built to a higher BAL, it will also help protect against ember attacks. So BAL has that double whammy benefit for you, both radiant heat as the BAL gets higher, if it's built to those standards, and also ember attack. Now, the other thing is most houses in Ku-ring-gai were built pre-1979 when these levels came in, when the legislation came in, so they're not at all protected in many ways against fire impacts. So that's important for us to realise. Thanks, Jenny.
Great. Thank you, Mark. James, did you indicate you wanted to say something?
No, you're fine. Yeah,
okay, right. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to go back to our fire now and see what happens as we progress. So our fire is well and truly impacting a whole range of areas around Ku-ring-gai, and lots of people, having to get out quickly and in advance of this fire. Now, likelihood is that some of these areas will be one way in, one way out. So if you've only got one way in and one way out, and that fire cuts off your exit route, then you're going to have to learn to shelter in place. So if you do shelter in place, you need to remember a few things. One of them is that you need to shelter in a room that is on the lee side of the fire, so not the side that the fire is coming. You want to shelter in a room that has 2 exits, so that if one exit gets blocked, perhaps because the roof's caught fire and caved in, one of those exits needs to be directly to the exterior. So the bathroom's not necessarily the best place unless your bathroom has a door to the outside as well as the inside. The other thing is that you, after the fire front has passed, you may want to have a ladder there and just put your head up into the ceiling and have a look and make sure that no embers have got in and no fires have started inside that ceiling cavity, because that's often what happens, and people don't know until the ceiling caves in. Andrew, is there anything else we should remember about sheltering in place?
Oh, no, I think they're the main points. It's an effective way of keeping out of danger for a half-hour period, which is the critical time as the fire passes over. And you're just staying down the other end of where the fire's coming from, should be enough to give you quite good protection.
And then once the fire has passed, go outside and just see if any little spot fires have started around the house. And,
yes, but once the house has protected you, it's then your turn to get outside and do the opposite, and that is to look out for embers that may have lodged in all those little crevices or landed in the garden, and they're going to be the ones that are potentially going to create the issues and cause the house to catch fire. The embers will come before and after the fire front, and that's the key period once the fire has passed over, to deal with those embers before they take hold.
Right. And I guess given in these conditions, there wouldn't be a lot of houses that necessarily could be relied upon to be able to withstand a fire of this intensity.
No, that's right. And as you mentioned earlier, once a fire takes hold, it's very easy for it to spread and jump from house to house. So it is important that to the extent you can, you remain vigilant and try and deal with those embers before they turn into a bigger problem. And of course, the danger is obviously that houses that aren't well prepared are going to have a greater risk of suffering that sort of consequence.
Thank you, Andrew. James, I believe Fire and Rescue have a program that you run for community fire units. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, we have a series of units or groups in the neighborhood groups that come together. We give them a fire trailer or a cabinet with some, like one of the petrol powered. We use petrol powered pumps and some fire hydrants and some hoses. We train the people on how to protect their properties in their neighborhoods about just this, how to they're not firefighters, so they're not going to go out and fight and stop the fire, but they prepare their neighborhoods and mitigate where the fire is going to come through. They help to remove the fire loading, identify how to plant your garden, essentially, and stuff, how to clean your gutters, and just that public education piece of preparing their properties coming through. Just if I can go back a little bit, when you preparing your house, you've got a bit of time generally before, if you decide you're going to protect in place, you've got a little bit of time to prepare. As you said, make sure your gas bottles are facing out, but also take your wheelie bins away from the house, because they're made of plastic, and a lot of time that fire goes up and it'll hit underneath the eaves, and generally your eaves may have been strong enough to protect from the bushfire, but the plastic and the rubbish in there will be enough to burn through and create that gap through. Also bring in your outside garden hose, bring it inside, because it will melt, and you can actually hook it into your laundry and take the little cap on the tap and put it on your laundry, and that way you've got a hose that if you find the fire in the ceiling cavity, you've got a hose to actually use it with. But yeah, the community fire units, we've got a number of units in this area already. You can go to the Fire and Rescue website. There's a lot of all the information about the community fire units on there and the work that they do.
Great, thanks. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our Climate Wise. And we're going to, we've looked at our personal situation. We've looked at how we can strengthen the resilience of our property. And then it's about strengthening the resilience of your neighbourhood, working with your neighbours to make an emergency plan, and who might need help in an emergency, and who are you going to contact, you're going to tell where you're going to, and how you're going to communicate as a group. Now, James was talking about the community fire units. Now, they're a great example of this kind of thing where a neighbourhood works together to get prepared. And if you haven't got enough people who are either got the time or inclined to be engaged in a CFU, then you can just find a couple of neighbours to do this with you, and might be a short street, might be a long street, but getting to know your area, getting to know the different ways you could get out, and getting to know those people who might need transport and assistance, or who might not be home to pick up their dog, that you can pick up the dog for them, etc., is a really great community building project. So I strongly encourage you to consider this step. And again, there's a whole range of questions which gives you ideas around how you might work with your neighbours and what sort of issues you might want to deal with. And again, this goes to a PDF, and you get to save it, and it's there for your use in the future, and can become part of your broader bushfire plan. So you can see this bushfire plan isn't just about what do you do in the days and weeks leading up to the fire season. This takes the long-term view. This is building resilience on a long-term scale. So a little bit different to the normal bushfire plan you may have seen in the past. So if we move it back to our fire, which is still burning. And what happens is there's a southerly busters going to come along, and the wind is going to completely swing around, and instead of coming from the northwest and blowing towards the southeast, it will change direction and come from the south and start blowing towards the north. And we'll see how the fire reacts to that kind of a rapid and intense change in wind speed and direction. So
That's like the southerly buster coming through, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, that's right. Which is very common in summer. We do see that quite a bit. Okay, so Lauren's going to swing that arrow around to face north and take it right out to its full wind speed, which I think is 90 kilometres an hour. Now, what does the fire do? The people who were on the flank of the fire and thought they had escaped the fire all of a sudden are now getting in the fire front. So you can see the fires burning in a couple of different directions at the moment, depending partly upon the landscape. So as it burns in the different directions, this is where it's blowing back now onto a urban area over there on the western side of the bridge. It's burnt out down half the golf course, and now it's burning up towards the north. And again, you'll see it, the fire just lighting up in little areas where it was almost extinguished, but now that the wind's changed, it's going into whole new areas of fuel. And so this is what happens in so many fires. People are on the flank of the fire, they think it's going to go past them, the wind changes, and all of a sudden the flank becomes the front. And it happens.
Actually, that has a term in firefighting. It's called the dead man zone. So you have to be really careful at fighting a fire if you're on the flank, just in case a wind change does come, because then you're exposed to the full intensity.
Andrew, you any comment at this stage?
Yeah, it's the same fire, but it's just traveling in a completely different direction, and it may change direction quite quickly. It's all determined by the wind, as you've said. So that just brings a whole new area into risk, and a whole new group of people that now need to work out what they're immediately going to do.
Very quickly, yeah. So sometimes the Bureau gives us warning that these southerlies are coming. The timing of them is the thing. They'll say, well, they're expecting a southerly late in the afternoon, but it might turn up at 2 p.m. You know, like it might turn up at 8 p.m. You just can't really accurately predict just how fast that southerly will come up the coast. Okay, so anybody want to make any last comments on the fire? No, all good? Yeah, James?
It's fine. It's just, again, when the warnings go out, just assume the current until you hear you can stand down. If the fire's going, it's going. Just be prepared.
Good, great, thank you. Okay, we go back to climate-wise communities for one last time. And we move on. You can see there's some links there to different plans that you can use this data that you've generated through this process. The Red Cross Prepared app is a good one, Get Prepared app. But you've got, the RFS's website and SES for Storm. Red Cross also does one specifically for carers and young children. And there are some that are multi-hazard and some that are just exclusive to one hazard. When I say multi-hazard, covers storms and heat and flood. Because there is a lot of generic content between disaster types. And that's important to know because it can give you a lot of good return for your any investment on strengthening your house. So right at the very end, we go to what's called the what if tool. Now, the what if tool, there's one for every hazard type, and this is for bushfire. Now, each one of these things came out from research into Black Saturday in 2009 that said about 5% of the people who were affected by Black Saturday had a bushfire plan. And those 5% were interviewed to say, how did your plan work on the day? And they almost universally said it didn't. And the reason was because the fire happened in a way they didn't expect it to happen. So what this wheel does, it's taken a whole lot of the things that people said went wrong that stopped their plan from working, and it allows you to think ahead and think about, well, if this did happen, what's my plan to deal with this situation? So in this particular one, the police block your access. So you've heard the fire warning, there's one in your area, but the police have already closed the roads and are not letting people in. Now, for all sorts of reasons, you would want to get back and get whatever possessions, your pets or whatever, from your house. So that needs to be factored into your planning. How would you deal with that? And that's where it comes really useful to know your neighbours. You can't reach your elderly parents. Again, it might be they're living in a bushland zone and all the communication is down. How do you reach them? And there's no water pressure, a very common one, very common. In fact, you don't want to count on there being any water pressure in your hoses in one of these big fires, particularly if you're at the end of a one-way road into Ku-ring-gai, because the person down the end is only going to get what's left from the 500 other people up the road already got their taps on and using the water.
Actually, that's a really big issue, Jenny, because Ku-ring-gai has very few pump stations internally to maintain really good water pressure. So it is a real issue during fires and even during hazard reduction burns when vehicles might take the water out of the mains via a standpipe. It's a real issue for Ku-ring-gai.
Absolutely. So again, you've got to think, if my plan is to stay and defend, but I have no water, it makes defending pretty hard. So there are a whole range of things you can keep playing with at your leisure, and gives you some food for thought about whether or not your plan has got all these elements acknowledged. Not all of them will be relevant to everyone, but most of them will be. Okay, so we're almost getting toward the end of our session. Lauren, do you want to talk about the brew dates?
Yeah, sure. We've just got a couple of questions. Someone wants to know why they turn off the water.
So it's not that they turn...
They never turn the water off.
No, they don't turn the water off.
Pressure for it to come out.
There's just so many people using it at the same time that you can only move so much water through a pipe.
And the other problem is our pipes are quite old, and to replace the whole stock would be an enormous cost. Truly would be. Yeah. For anywhere in Sydney.
But yeah, no, it's not a matter of just turning them off. Okay.
So the other thing that we get asked quite a lot about is about hazard reduction burn. So if there's been a hazard reduction burn in the last couple of years, is that something that's going to help protect homes? Mark, do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, Council and RFS and Fire and Rescue too, we all work together on hazard reduction burns around the interface. As I said, we've got about 100 kilometres of interface, and the last few years we've only managed to do some hazard reduction burning because of the really rigid prescription we have to adhere to. We've got some recent burns in. For a small fire, yes, it will stop the intensity coming up behind your house. For larger fires, probably a less beneficial effect. But as I said, we have that large gap after about 4 years when fuels build up for another, say, 7 to 8 years before we can put another burn in, when you will have that residual fuel load. It's called residual risk, and it is there sitting there. So there has to be other methods as well as hazard reduction burns to ensure both house protection and personal safety. So yeah, it can do so much, hazard reduction burning, and it is a good method for Australia, and it helps both the biodiversity side and also reduces overall risk. So yeah, has its limitations. Thanks, good question.
Great, Thanks, Mark. Well, I might just quickly go through the Bushfire Wise rebates that we have on offer here at Ku-ring-gai Council. The easiest way to find them is just to head to the council website and then type in Bushfire Wise into your search bar there. And it will be the first one that comes up. So if you come through here, so we do offer rebates of up to $1,000 to help make your home more resilient to bushfire. So it is a really, really good opportunity. If you've got something you've been thinking about that you might want to do, there are lots of different options. So the most common one that we get is installing metal garter guards across your roofline. But you can see here there are a whole range of different options that might be suitable for your home. So once you've gone through your ready check on the Climate Wise Communities website, that might give you some ideas as to the most appropriate things for your home. So as well as the up to $1,000 on the items themselves, we'll also pay up to $500 if you need a CDC or DA. So if your home is on bushfire prone land, you may require a CDC or DA for any retrofits. And we do have plenty of information on the council website, and you can also go to the RFS website as well. So it's pretty easy to apply. You just come in through this page here, submit your pre-approval application, and then somebody from council will be in contact with you to discuss your application. We will need you to send through the PDF copy of step 3 of your ready check. That's because we just want to encourage you to do it. And then we'll get some quotes and things like that, and then you're good to go and submit your final rebate. So it's a pretty easy process, one that's definitely worth considering.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lauren. All right. Anyone got any closing remarks? Mark or James or Andrew?
Talk to everyone about it. If you've got any opinions or any worries, ring council, ring fire and rescue, ring RFS. Don't bottle it up. Talk to people. That's the best way, and try and nut something out. And the more people who talk about it in the community, the better, and come up with plans in your own neighbourhood too. I know along the Chase and Ormond Road, there's a very good community there, really good contact, and I'm sure along Carlisle too, people getting to know each other and talking about fire issues, and come to council. We can't solve everything, but we'll try our very best, truly. Thanks.
Yeah, and the key message from us is protect your property in advance of the bushfire season. Prepare your property and have a plan, and make sure you know when to implement the bushfire plan.
Fire and rescue, just look out for each other. Have a look. Be warned. Stay up to date if you can. Talk to your neighbours. Go out and use this as an opportunity to get to know your neighbours better, and look out for each other.
All right, so just to finish off, we've got one last poll. This one's only 2 questions, so I know everyone's going to be able to do this one very quick. So only 2 questions. Will you make a written bushfire survival plan in the next month? And would you like to receive reminder emails with tips to help you? So if you've signed up and we've got your email address, we will send out some of those links that we've talked about today, so that you have all of those at your disposal. Thank you very much to all of our panelists, James, Andrew, Mark and Jenny. It's been a fabulous webinar. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact the Environment Sustainability team, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you all. Wonderful.
Thank you for having us.